Afternoon and welcome. My name is Gary Tardikoff. I am the faculty chair of the Institute on World Affairs. We have a faculty chair, a student chair, and anyone in the Iowa State community who is interested in joining. You can be a student, faculty, member of the staff. You can be someone who lives near campus and is just interested in what goes on here. You're all welcome to participate. We will begin meeting the Friday after Thanksgiving at 4 o'clock in the Pine Room. If you ever want to know when we're meeting, call the Committee on Lectures and ask when the Institute on World Affairs is meeting. We'll begin by recapping what's happened this week, and then we'll go on to pick out what is, to those in the room meeting, the most important problem in the world today. If you've got a problem that you think is one everyone here should know about, that you think is extremely important, come to this meeting. Get together with other people, organize that topic, bring people. We've brought some of the most interesting intellectuals, politicians, even scholars. If you're at all interested in doing this, if you're finding this week interesting, please contact us. Come get involved in the Institute on World Affairs. You can have a say in how it works next year. All right. Here's Jeff Weiss, who will introduce today's speaker.
Hello, I would like to first mention tonight's speaker in the sunroom of the Memorial Union at 8 p.m. Louis Nkosi, who was exiled from South Africa, is going to speak about the role of literature in the creation of a new Africa. And I would also like to announce another change in the program. Mohammed Sanam is not able to be with us tomorrow night. He is involved with the United Nations negotiations regarding the crisis in Somalia. And instead, Barakat Habte Selassie, who served as the Attorney General of Ethiopia under Emperor Haile Selassie, will be with us tomorrow night at Thursday 8 p.m. in the sunroom to speak about Somalia as metaphor, the emerging role of the international community in regional conflicts. Our speaker today comes to us from Washington, D.C. Nomonde Nguvu is a special representative from South Africa to the United Mine Workers of America. She is a spokesperson for the South African Mine Workers Union. She was a research fellow at the Institute for Policy Studies and conducted research on the oral history of women's participation in the liberation movement in South Africa. Today, I was speaking with her a few days ago. She has the unenviable task about talking about the role of multinationals and labor in the new South Africa. The reason I say unenviable is South Africa is changing every day. We know that the last year, the working class and the masses of the people lost a great leader, the head of the South African Communist Party, Chris Hani. We also know that the South African labor movement is perhaps the most organized and militant of labor movements in modern times. So without further ado, let me introduce Nomonde Nguvu.
Thank you very much. First, like to thank the people who invited me to come to this conference. Pat Miller called me last year, very early last year, and told me about this date, which was some time in the future that I couldn't even dream of. And in the process, I manufactured a human being, which is with me here. So I've been quite busy through that time. And she was, I thought at the time, but now she's here. And I usually get very nervous before I speak. And this morning, she deprived me of my time to be nervous, because she had her own demands. So now, without being nervous, I just have to plunge into this, and this is a new role for me. So if there are any mistakes, please bear with me. And a note on misunderstandings. English is not my first language. And now I've included baby talk into the 11 languages that I speak. If you don't understand anything I say, please just raise your hand. I can say it in another language, okay? Do you all know the artichokes? This is, I don't know if it's a fruit or a vegetable. There is a flower in South Africa which is called the national flower. It's a protea, and it looks like artichokes dipped in pink. I used to hate the flower for the sake of the fact that it was a national symbol. But then my parents loved it so much. My father used to buy my mother this flower whenever they were made, and I see most South Africans in this country still keep this flower. And I came across an interesting article. One of the children of this South African white family said she went to South Africa last year in December. So when she was talking to me, she says, I finally understood why my mother loves this artichoke, which is dipped in pink. It was standing there on top of the mountain, standing tall and pretty in Cape Town towards the sunset. Now, Cape Town is one of the most beautiful parts of the country. It's like California. And this is just to clear a myth about what place I'm talking about, what it looks like, and why we love our country so much. Because a lot of people say, are you from Africa? You must be glad you're here. On the contrary, no, I'm glad I'm African. And today we have a lot of things to celebrate, because I'm going to start on a positive note and talk about what we're looking forward to in South Africa. We're looking forward to the first time elections in the history of South Africa since 1950, when our people were deprived of the right to vote. And those of us who have been born and raised South Africans have never had the right to vote, never had the right to live wherever we want, choose where to take our children to schools of our choice. We were designated at birth where to live, where to walk, what times, by curfews, by pass laws, internal passport, and all those things. And that is ending today. And another thing that happens in categorization is that there's a set of symbols which are used to describe and explain South Africa as first world and third world, like most places. Now, this can be a confusing analogy when it comes to South Africa. To clear again the myth and reality pertaining to this, in terms of this analogy, South Africa exhibits the characteristics of both first world and third world. It appears to be a first world country when you look at the fact that we have 70% literacy rate in the country. We have 50 minerals on our soil. We enjoy the highest standard of living, which is 3 times that of the whites in America for the whites in South Africa. And yet we have our slums and our shanty towns, and a nation inside of South Africa that has no national health care for the black population. We have an illiteracy rate of about 80% in the rural areas of the black population. Within the same country, children die from malnutrition and tuberculosis and bilharzia, poverty diseases, in a country which exports about 40% of its food to the African continent. South Africa's fertility rate exhibits the patterns of slow growth patterns which are characteristic of whites in most countries. And South Africa's reality combines modern cities like Europe and America. We have our New York, cities which look like Boston, we have Cape Town, we have Durban, we have Port Elizabeth, and also we have, unfortunately, we don't have what you call here these projects, but we have similar conditions for people who live in shanty towns which are bulldozed by the government on a continuous basis. Even as I speak, South Africa is in a constant state of change, perpetual flux. I was there in December last year, and I lived in downtown where the white folks used to live. Houses there are going for about 40,000 rands, not dollars, which is about $20,000. Because the housing market has gone down. Anytime a black person moves into the neighborhood, the white neighbor moves out, which creates opportunities for blacks to move in. So this time it's a voluntary takeover of the housing that is rightfully ours, because the whites just don't like to have black neighbors, which is great for us. And the other thing is economics have dictated that the people who are involved in housing, restaurants and hotels, need people to buy. And as the black bourgeoisie expands and black wealth and consumer interests begin to attract the white commercialists, they realize that rather than run empty hotels for lack of enough whites to fill them, they invite blacks to come and occupy the hotels. So now when you look at Johannesburg, if you just stepped out of the airport and walked into Johannesburg, you would ask yourself the question, but where is this apartheid they are talking about? Because for one, there are more blacks than whites in the country, and therefore there's more integration. This country has not yet seen integration in my own personal experience. I haven't seen it. And even when I go into a restaurant, I find that blacks sit in one corner. Even on campuses, I find in the library, blacks have their own table and whites have their own table. Now, this is not a common characteristic in South Africa, because the battle lines are clear-cut and they are well drawn, and people have been fighting for specific issues, and when they don't have that issue pertaining to that specific, they don't fight. They get along real well. So the unfortunate thing is that the influx of people from the urban areas, from the black townships into the cities, has caused a lot of congestion. And there's also another influx happening with these senseless wars that have been going on in Angola and Namibia and Mozambique and all of Africa. People have moved down south into South Africa, where at least there's a haven of economic prosperity for those who can make it. And those who have skills that are not being utilized in their countries are welcome, especially in white South Africa, since they have no loyalties to the political movement and opposition groups to the whites. So we have a real strange situation going on in South Africa. What I'd like to talk about briefly is the role of disinvestment that most of you played such a crucial part in. With disinvestment, I'd like to point out clearly that it is the isolation, not the contact, that has made the significant economic changes that are taking place in South Africa today. The rationale that, yes, the sanctions didn't work, that's why we need to get rid of them anyway, I can't see any logic in that kind of argument. However, I'd like to point out the positives that have taken place. The apartheid system was undermined by the changing nature of economic activity inside the country. And the need to admit black workers to the ranks of skilled and semi-skilled positions was imperative. With the withdrawal of subsidiaries of multinationals inside of South Africa had to be self-sufficient and thus embark on other methods of getting the work done within the country. This then created more opportunities for black, and although the South African government has still not met the quota, they indeed ended up opening up skilled positions for people who had been skilled for the jobs, but then there was a color bar that precluded them from occupying certain positions which were reserved for whites. And then they also opened up semi-skilled positions. In fact, up until now, in the mining industry, the rule still stands that if you are black, you're either a semi-skilled or an unskilled laborer. Because out of the 13 job categories, the blacks cannot participate. They cannot get the certification even for the jobs which they perform. And this is an industry which employs about 600,000 workers. And the other thing that happened with the economic necessity was the demographic significance of the black consumer, which created interest in the black wealth which was given to them and the economic clout that blacks then had. Now, the US policy of constructive engagement becomes clearly opposed to this which I just described. That the constructive engagement policy didn't work, and in fact it was the isolation that worked. And the significant thing again to note here is that out of all the vetoes that have taken place of the President of the United States, there are only two where the Congress overrode the veto of the President. And one of them is on the question of South Africa, the other was Vietnam. Which means it was such a significant issue for the American people that they stood up and made sure to override the President's veto successfully. Now, I'd like to congratulate your insight into this contribution in foreign policy legislation for the US government. And in terms of South Africa's end or demise of apartheid, you will find that it is mostly the US, and singularly the US, which legislated in its country for change in South Africa. And that's an important step for people to remember as historians. And in fact, that's one thing that people will have to bear in mind when they continue to support any economic policies or just foreign policies concerning outside countries, and in this particular case to South Africa. Now, the South African government used to employ only British immigrants or even US immigrants for any skilled positions that they could not fill in the country. So they imported labor. With sanctions and the economic isolation of South Africa, that had to stop. South Africa didn't have to manufacture certain things because they could get them from outside. With sanctions, they had to be self-reliant and embark on. I know we were busy with an oil boycott, and South Africa had to become involved in a liquefaction process of synthetic fuel and change coal to oil to be self-sufficient, because we have, of all the minerals that we have in the country, we have no oil deposits of our own. Now, this creates a climate for a self-sufficient and self-reliant South Africa, wherein we call upon the United States to come and help. The US aid has come up with some interesting packages that they want to introduce in South Africa. With the packages, they have brought their experts into the country. Rather than come in and oftentimes just send the money, they will come with staff, office, lock, stock and barrel and everything and help. Now, this is the same reason why we called for sanctions. We called for sanctions because we wanted to develop an independence of the people in the country so that they can run their own affairs. And this is the kind of help that we don't need when USAID sends its own experts and all the money that they pump in ends out going out just as fast. It's job displacement for the people of the country. It's further castration of the people who've been denigrated, have no confidence in themselves, and are lacking in skills. So this is something that's becoming very sensitive. And I'm hoping to be back in South Africa, definitely there for elections by December, to see what I can do in terms of participating in some of the involvement. And other interesting things that are going on is that we have community-based development programs, which, for those of you who are familiar with the Paulo Freire studies of Brazil, are very successful in the country, but they are not what the IMF and the World Bank generally support. They are going on in the country, and the World Bank has moved in South Africa. They've relocated. I don't think they have an active office in Washington, D.C. as active as it is in downtown Johannesburg, South Africa. And I'm telling you this for real. Now this is very scary because, like the other speakers previously have been explaining, people don't really understand some of these policies, and they're going to adopt them in a rush to make sure that they see the immediate changes, and that's going to backfire in the end. With the other thing that they need to be doing in the economy, the companies that are saying they'll move to South Africa were there because of the magnet of cheap labor that was provided by a repressed workforce and by the apartheid system. Now we have to compete with Mexicans, we have to compete with Eastern Europe, Yugoslavia, we have to compete with Russia for companies to hold their capital around the world to choose where they're going to make the most profits. Companies are in business for business. So a restructuring of the workforce has to come into play as people start talking about the economy. Nomenclatures like we just want socialism or we want communism are not going to serve the end of the day. People are going to have to look at the practical realities that confront them. I mean, something like to the extent of looking at the configuration of the workforce. This thing of people working an 8 to 5 job and others working no hours at all. And in South Africa, the people who've been working, for instance, in the mines, away from their families, the companies have a task now of providing housing and social security benefits and benefits in general to the workers whom they just paid a wage, a salary, because the government designated women and children as superfluous appendages to the worker. As we speak, the studies that have been made in South Africa recently suggest that by the year 2000, South Africa will need an additional 120,000 managers in higher level positions, and 45,000 of these positions can be filled by whites, and the rest will have to be filled by blacks. So it's no longer a social responsibility for companies which are thinking of moving to South Africa to train them into these positions. It's an economic imperative. So I'm talking about a growth point for companies in terms of how they want to view South Africa. And I'm really skeptical that because sanctions have been called off, they're going to rush into the country when they can choose which country they can exploit and get more profits. They won't necessarily come to us. But however, we're hoping that when the time comes, that will happen. But there's also the informal sector, which is very interesting and a developing sector in the economy, and it contributes a lot in South Africa. It employs about 6 to 10 workers in one small business, 11 to 15 others, but it contributes about 23.8% to the economic growth of the economy with each year. So I think it's one of the areas which will need to be supported as we go along. And I'd like to take a moment to talk about the current situation, which most people would like to hear about. We're looking at the strategic objective of elections in South Africa is to have an election wherein both whites and blacks participate equally in creating a democratic constitution. So this is not an election for the country per se, but it's an election to draw the constitution. So it's a preliminary stage to the real thing. We have obstacles that the government has got more resources than the other political movements, which are not even yet political parties. Our people don't even know how to vote along party lines. And when a person like Chris Hani gets killed in the country, they don't think about what party he belongs to, therefore that's the party to support. They think about this particular man died, then who else are we going to vote for? It's again surrounding personalities, which means there's going to be a lot of voters' education needed throughout the country. Unfortunately, the total budget calculated for the 9-month period of this voters' education is about 134 million rands. And we have to try and raise this money as fast as we can within the country and outside of the country. In the meantime, there is a civil war actually going on within the country. The right-wing Afrikaner whites are armed to the teeth. They are a prototype of the Ku Klux Klan of this country, except in South Africa they don't cover their faces because they were legislated and given the right to be white extremists and racist. They continue to fight to go into townships, sometimes paint their faces in black or employ black people to kill people rampantly. This serves to demoralize the people as they become so enthused about the election. The other thing that's happening is that the white government goes to the most poor areas of the country and provides bread and beer or whatever it is that the people are going to be enticed by, and tells them, if you vote for me, this is the kind of thing that will happen. So people will get confused about who to vote for. Hopefully that's not the case, but it may be. So we need to also develop an infrastructure that will allow people from the rural areas where there's no transportation to come to the voting polls. There will be about 4 phases of the election campaign. First month will be preparation, the second will be voter education, third phase will be political campaigns, which will be running for the duration of 8 to 10 months. And then the phase 4 will be the election week. We're looking at a very busy time in our country. It is at this time that we do call upon university students who have the ability to become involved in programs funded by the university to go to South Africa and help with this voters' education and become involved in campaigns. It would be an enriching experience mutually for both of the people who will be involved. And we also have the problems of gender discrimination, which unfortunately the women who have been fighting alongside the men in the country now have to fight alongside each other to eradicate the discrimination of women against the men that they were fighting with. So we really have a lot of problems. We also have a problem where the children of our country, like the women in the country, are suffering the most under this pain of oppression, and continue to do so with the deaths and the killings that are taking place. The mothers still remain to be the ones at home to explain to the children what's going on. The government so far has targeted the killing of men. For some reason, I think there is a mistake in thinking that the country wouldn't run without men, because it's such a mess as it is, and it's men who've been running it. I'm not suggesting that they should kill women. I just think their choice of killing because they want to cripple the movement is not going to take them anywhere anyway. So anyway, there's an illustration of a little girl who comes home and finds that daddy is dead because of this rampant shootings. When I'm talking about rampant shootings, I have such horrible images in my mind that I don't even want to get into telling you about it. I can call home and say to my mother, oh, I'm thinking of coming next month. She says, no, don't come next month. Yesterday, 15 people were killed on their way to work by a runaway car. Nobody knows who these people were. Now, if you read in the newspapers that there are political factions fighting, please think for a moment how a political party knows which political party the people belong to when they are queuing up for a bus to go to work. Just think about it. So you know for a fact that what they're talking about is nonsense. So this, the little girl says, Mommy, where's Daddy? And Mommy continues to inspire hope and energy. Because what we've had in our country that has brought us this far is the social energy that has been imbibed through the culture, the role play, then the oral traditions and the history that we've learned mostly from the mothers. And she says, Daddy is in heaven, baby. Why did he go to heaven? Because they needed him there more than we need him here. And I don't know if I can do this, but I'll try. It's an old story which has been going on for years, but it looks like it will be going on for a lot more years before it's over. Mommy, mommy, what is heaven like? Is it like a house so pretty and bright? I don't understand. It doesn't seem fair. If Daddy loved us so, then why did he go there? Heaven, my child, is a beautiful place where there's a smile on everyone's face. Daddy loved us both, but he had to go. We needed him more, but they needed him most. Mommy, mommy, is heaven very far? How long would it take if we go by car? If you pass me at the corner, I could take my bike. Mommy, please tell me, what's heaven like? You can't go there by a bike or a car. It's over the moon, way beyond the stars. I tell you, Daddy loved us both, but he had to go. But if I know your daddy has saved a place for us. Mommy, mommy, I can hardly wait. I'm so excited. Heaven sounds great. I can now run and tell my sisters goodbye. But Mommy, please tell me, why is there a tear in your eye? Mommy. Thank you. I'll take questions. Question?
When you think it was New South Africa, what can be done to legislate new regulations so that the gain that you have obtained through blood and losing life wouldn't be lost by an influx of refugees from Mozambique, from Angola, and so on? They would be willing to take less than minimum wage in South Africa.
The first thing that people are doing now for the elections is to make clear that distinction. Because in the past, as far as South Africa goes, if you're black, you're a black South African. If you're white, you can be an immigrant, but then you have the right to be a citizen. Now we have to make sure that there are structures set in place to make sure that the Africans who have come into the country who are not South African don't necessarily just get a flow into the South African, but of course there'll be an overlap. So there'll be immigration systems that will have to be set in place before the election. And the second thing that the regulatory process is going to take is that the labor movement has been working very closely with the Department of Manpower and also the labor movement is not at the same rank as the Department of Manpower and the government, and business. So we have business, government, and labor all working together to ensure that what they have ensures them, the business community, a healthier industrial climate, to have credibility with international investors in terms of access of capital and markets inside of the country. So whatever kind of legislation comes out will be in the interest of all three parties. Left to the government alone, even the ANC government, that wouldn't be as promising as I think it is now, with the fact that labor itself will be involved and business.
You mentioned U.S. agencies pouring resources into South Africa in a way that the resources were
Coming out again.
going out of South Africa. Have you found a way of ensuring that the resources come in, they use the indigenous resources to, they send in the funds and use the indigenous
No.
resources to build the country?
No, some of our strongest supporters have had an inspiring notion to go into South Africa and work there. It's very hard to explain to some of the people that we need the help, but we don't need the displacement of people who are there. There are a lot of people in the country who can do the work. And sometimes it becomes even trickier when you come to the question of black and white, because African Americans should indeed have more access to black businesses in South Africa, because this is a black thing. Again, there are enough black people in South Africa who would like to have contracts for black businesses, who would like to do the same things that blacks are doing here. It has to be a mutual kind of consultation basis. Now, with the bigger funders, it's very tricky, because they're used to doing this, and they've been doing it throughout Africa. They come into the country, they set up an office, and whatever they say they are coming to do sometimes looks very good on paper, and it's an offer you cannot refuse. I mean, there's one offer that I read about last year from the World Bank. It was so good, given to the ANC, that it felt like the ANC could go home and rest. After that, the World Bank would do everything for us. We didn't need to worry anymore. And there were people there who felt good about this, and they took it. Now they're in South Africa, they are jobless. The people who are making the offers are in South Africa, working there and here. They have the jobs. And the money that they were talking about is being utilized to employ more people from here who are doing the work. And indeed, there is some kind of benefit that comes out. For instance, this is a public policy school for management training. So we do have some people who attend the school, their school, with their staff. The only thing is to keep on talking about it, and to have quotas, maybe, to say this. We can only allow one expert at a time. 10 of them is rather too much. And then we should also look at how much money comes in and how much money should stay in. Because yesterday I was listening to the people who were giving speeches here. The speaker mentioned exactly how much money comes into the country and how much stays. I think she said zero. Yes, zero money was coming out of the investment that they make. And she eventually explained further that it looks like what has happened is that instead of colonialism coming to an end, we have a new kind of colonialism, which is even worse, because it no longer has the face of missionaries and government bodies. It just has the color of money. And that knows no boundaries.
Looking from outside in, most people will think Buthelezi is a wild card. How much do you think that will influence the local elections?
To think the ANC is a what?
That Buthelezi is a wild card. It might influence the local elections a lot. How
Now,
do you feel?
Buthelezi is of no consequence in the country. I wouldn't like to spend one more breath of my time and yours on this US notion of Buthelezi. Throughout the struggles of people for liberation, the US has managed to find a person that they think they ought to support or call whatever moral names they want to call him. For instance, Buthelezi has come in and out of this country, hosted by the moral majority people and all the priests. They believe in him, the same people who have invited Mobutu and Savimbi. These people are of no consequence given the force of the change and determination of the people in the country. We no longer need to define him inside of South Africa. Besides, his notorious statistic of 6 million Zulus is unrealistic, because if you go to university, boy meets girl, they don't ask first, are you Zulu? Are you Xhosa? See, when the government created these universities and these so-called homelands, they made sure those were Zulus and whatnot. They were on tribal and ethnic basis. But that didn't really work that way. For instance, when I apply to a university, I check what area it's in and I write the ethnic group of that area to be admitted. It doesn't matter. So when the product of the children come out of those unions, they are not necessarily either Zulu or Xhosa. So the core group that they scooped out of a cup as the 6 million people owned by Buthelezi will surprise you. When you go to the area in KwaZulu, you'll find a lot of people are actually proud card-carrying members of the ANC. And interestingly enough, they have a membership for Inkatha. Now they say, if you knock on the door and you say, yes, we want to know what your membership is, they look at you. If you look neat and clean, they say, ANC. And if you knock on the door, you look roughshod and you're carrying a stick and you say, what political organization do you belong to? They say, Inkatha, and they show you the Inkatha card, which is the Buthelezi party. And then there's no violence. These people leave. They know now, how to have all cards that are necessary for survival on a daily basis. And if they have that ability to discern, it means when the time comes for the vote, they'll know who to vote for.
You also mentioned that when you call home and you talk to your mother said not to come home because 15 people also had been killed. I'm sure she has strong feelings about your survival or your presence in this world and wouldn't want you to die like that. How do you feel about going home when she tells you that?
I feel that my mother loves me very much, and I appreciate her saying that, and I'm going home. See, I long lost the fear of death and the threat of the white backlash to us long ago. You see, in 1976, June the 16th, they shot at a crowd of small children, 7 years old and younger. This is de Klerk, the man who just received a Nobel Peace Prize, was the Minister of Education at the time. And the only reason some of us didn't die is that we were not hit by a bullet. Now, we cannot walk in constant fear of being hit by a bullet, because if we walk this way, maybe that will happen. And that's why we have the toi toi. Can't catch up with us because our feet are always moving on the ground. And in the bottom line is that it's a very difficult thing for people like us who've been fighting. God became exiled and left our homes to fight for the liberation of our country, to miss out on this one time that we finally come to fruition of that aspect of it. It's also a very challenging thing for me to have to think, now that I have a child of my own, what do I do about that? Do I then stay and say I'm cut out of the struggle anymore? No, I'll go home, my mother will take care of the baby, and I'll go on and march with the rest of the soldiers towards Pretoria, where we're going to take our country back.
How many political parties do you have in South Africa?
How?
How many political parties that are registered for the upcoming election?
We don't yet have political parties. We have political movements. The African National Congress, the PAC, and the American Zulu version of Buthelezi, which in South Africa has not yet made it. What Buthelezi has succeeded in doing in South Africa is to create the controversy that people don't seem to recognize